That was John Hurt as the Elephant Man, a freak of nature with the soul of a poet. And the Elephant Man is one of 5 new movies we'll be reviewing this week on Sneak Previews. Across the aisle from me is Gene Siskel, film critic of the Chicago Tribune.
And this is Roger Ebert, film critic of the Chicago Sun-Times. Now, lately, Roger and I have been agreeing on virtually every movie we've been discussing. This show will be different.
You can say that again.
Okay. In addition to The Elephant Man, about which we disagree, for example,
let's move on.
All right, I'll step up in quality with the story of The Elephant Man. It's been told in books, a successful play, now a movie. It's based on the true story of John Merrick, a hideously deformed young man who lived in Victorian England and was made an attraction in a traveling freak show until he came under the care of a London doctor. The doctor took pity on Merrick, gave him a permanent home, and encouraged the flowering of his intelligence and sensitivity. But John Merrick, the so-called Elephant Man, died at the age of 27. It's a heartbreaking story and never more moving than when the doctor, played by Anthony Hopkins, first interviews John Merrick in the hospital. The movie is filmed in black and white.
First, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Would that be all right? Your owner tells me, I mean, the man who looks after you tells me that you're English and that your name is John Merrick. John Merrick, is that right? I tell you what, I think I'll ask you a question and you shake your head like this for... have you always been the way you are now? Are you in any pain? Are your parents still alive? Do you understand me? Your father, your mother, are they dead?
Freddie, what are you doing for...
At first, Hopkins' interest in Merrick is purely scientific as he presents his patient to his fellow doctors.
Note, if you will, the extreme enlargement of the skull, the right upper limb, which is totally useless, the alarming curvature of the spine. And would you turn around, please?
Turn around, please.
The looseness of the skin and the varying fibrous tumors that cover 90% of the body. And there is every indication that these afflictions have been in existence and have progressed rapidly since birth. The patient also suffers from chronic bronchitis. As an interesting side note, in spite of the aforementioned anomalies, the patient's genitals remain entirely intact and unaffected. Thank you.
One of the issues the movie raises is whether or not the doctor is merely exploiting John Merrick, similar to the way the freak show had. By taking Merrick under his care, the doctor did make himself famous, and he encouraged many upper-class Londoners to meet Merrick. The head nurse at the hospital confronts Hopkins directly with that charge that he is exploiting his patient.
Mrs. Mother said I don't think you should have any more visitors today, and I have to lecture at the college, so I'll be back this evening.
Excuse me, sir, but if you have time, I would like a word with you.
I'm rather late. What is it?
Well, sir, I don't quite understand why it is you allow that sort of people in there.
Why? Because he enjoys it, and I think it's very good for him.
Yes, but, sir, you saw the expression on their faces. They didn't hide their disgust. They don't care anything about John. They only want to impress their friends.
I think you're being rather harsh on them, don't you, Mrs. Motherson?
I beg your pardon, sir.
You yourself hardly showed much loving kindness when you first arrived, did you?
I bathed him. I fed him and I cleaned up after him, didn't I? Yes. And I see that my nurses do the same.
Yes.
And if loving kindness can be called care and practical concern, then I did show him loving kindness, and I am not ashamed to admit it.
I didn't mean it exactly that way, Mrs. Motherson. Now, please believe me. Now, of course I appreciate your concern. I appreciate everything that you've done for Mr. Merrick.
Thank you.
But I am the physician in charge, and I must do what I think is best for him. Please, now, I'm also very late.
If you ask my opinion, he's only being stared at all over again.
Thank you.
Right about now, I think a lot of people probably watching the show are wondering, hey, when are we going to get to see what the Elephant Man really looks like? Well, sorry, but the film's distributor, Paramount Pictures, would not release a scene of the Elephant Man without that bag over his misshapen head. Their gimmick is obvious. You have to pay $4 to see him, which for me, maybe you agree with this, it puts the film company, I think, in the same position as the owner of a freak show. That aside, I want to state that I did enjoy The Elephant Man, that I was moved very much by its story. What's so good about it for me is the performance under the grotesque mask by actor John Hurt. We see his sad eyes behind those deformities, and we know there's a person there, a person trapped by something he cannot change.
Well, this is not a bad film, but I can't quite endorse it. I think there are a couple of issues. One of them you brought up, this business of 100 years after Merrick's death, the sideshow still goes on. To some degree, this movie hopes to succeed at the box office because of our perhaps unworthy curiosity about what the Elephant Man really looks like.
All right, but let's not blame the film for it. It's the film company's fault. What's your other objection?
Well, okay, I have another objection. That is, what is this relationship between Merrick and the doctor? We're told in this movie we're invited to feel that Merrick was very courageous, very noble. Why? Well, maybe one reason is, despite his handicaps, he learned to function in society. Maybe that's a reason. In the movie, you don't get that. The movie starts out with him snuffling. He can't talk. He can't say anything. Later on, the 23rd Psalm, Romeo and Juliet. Where did he learn to speak like this? How was he brought along? I would have been fascinated by scenes showing the doctor-patient relationship, these two people learning to communicate. But no, instead of that, we get a lot of sensationalism.
Well, I think what you have to assume from that is that the guy was simply traumatized, knew the stuff early. You're right, it's not clear on that point, but Roger, I think that's a small point compared to the big point of the film, for me, which was how we react to people who are radically different than us, to freaks, what we think is freaks. Sometimes people can't relate to people who are uglier, that they think uglier, or lower class than they are. This film had the same reaction for me that at the end of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, when we see the alien creature, and I felt how sad it was that we couldn't communicate with alien creatures. I felt the same way with this film. How sad it is that someone who is radically different from us, we cut them off, we shut them off, we eradicate them.
I think that what you're doing, though, is bringing a good idea to the film that isn't necessarily there. I kept asking...
I only got it when I saw the picture.
What is this film trying to say about the Elephant Man? Well, it starts out by showing his mother, I don't know, raped by elephants, attacked by elephants, dreaming about elephants.
The beginning...
His disease has nothing to do with elephants. Then at the end, it shows him as kind of a star child, 2001 style. I don't know what that means
You're
either.
only
And
bringing
all
up
during
small
the film,
points.
he has all of this stuff about the Victorian Industrial Revolution. We see sweatshops, smokestacks, and so forth. None of it has anything to do with the life of the Elephant Man.
I can't deny the little things that you're mentioning. I think what you are missing, and fortunately the little things got in the way of, I think what you're missing, the big picture. That's why I like the film.
Well, okay, I couldn't find the big picture in this film, so we disagree.
We're back to disagreeing on The Elephant Man. Roger thought the film was badly confused in its motives. I found a terribly sad story about society's outcasts and the way people shut themselves off from other people.
So 4 disagreements out of 5, but I think of the 5 movies on the show, the one that, even though I didn't like it, I think is probably the most worthy is The Elephant Man.
No, we absolutely agree on that. That's the one to see.
Okay.